Well, I've got two cameras here, an Agfa Solinette and an Agfa Super Solinette. In the States, the equivalent camera would have been sold as an Ansco Regent or an Ansco Super Regent, but basically they're the same as this. And these cameras have helical focusing, but the focusing is a little bit stiff on this one. This is the Super, and on this one it's not just stiff, it doesn't move at all. So I want to have the helical all apart, the focusing mechanism all apart, cleaned, freed of all that nasty, probably set like concrete Agfa green grease, cleaned out and reassembled with some fresh grease and working smoothly. Now with a viewfinder camera, it doesn't matter if the focus is a little bit stiff. You can deal with that. In fact, sometimes it's an advantage because it means that you're unlikely to knock the focus and change the setting while you've got your camera up to the eye taking a photo. But with a rangefinder camera, that focus needs to move very smoothly and very freely because you are setting the focus with the camera held to your eye. So that focus adjustment there needs to be smooth and easy. Otherwise it will become very, very frustrating indeed. So, since this one is set like concrete, let's start with this one. To remove the shutter, you're going to need a tool, something like this most likely. This is a Belgian USA. You used to be able to get these on eBay, and I just did a quick search through my history of emails and so forth, and it tells me I got this sometime back about 2007. I'm fairly sure Mr. Belgian stopped making them promptly after about that time, and they are not very available. But it is the same in practice as the tools for removing the retainer rings on the Retina cameras, and on my website. If you do a wee search, you'll probably find all the sizes and information to help you get some, either turn one yourself or find some mate who's got a lathe and pressure them to do it for you. Anyway, let's get this in the back here. Check that I've got the tool engaged. I'm using a wrench on this to turn this because it's likely to be quite stiff. No, it did move. Oh, it's tight though. Well, that came off. As you can see, here's my retaining ring. There's one paper shim here from the back of the shutter and another paper shim here. Now this one's interesting. It's not plain paper. It's some sort of document or something that's been used. That's very unusual. But anyway, there's the shutter out of the camera, and that can be dealt with separately because really all I want to do at the moment is deal with this. Now that's moving reasonably freely there, but the reason that the ring is moving freely is I'm only turning the outer helical and the inner helical is turning with it. Normally the inner helical would need to stay fixed. It would stay in line with, this would not rotate with it, it would just move in and out. So we've got to take this thing apart. Now I think from memory, just looking at this camera, the bellows are just about shot on it. This one's had a hard life, this camera. Let's open the back of this, have a little look. There are 4 screw heads visible in the corners there on the back of the front standard, and I'm fairly confident that they will hold the bellows to the back here and possibly even hold this whole front piece. So I'll get to those screws. I'm just putting a drop of Naphtha cigarette lighter fluid down here between the inner helical and the outer helical, because the outer helical sort of moves, the inner helical doesn't. It's moving now. It's quite stiff, but it's moving. I want to mark the relative position of the inner and outer helical so I know where everything is. So I'll bring this round to the infinity position, and at that stage, from memory, this hole at the top here, which lines up with the pin on the shutter, was at the top. Yeah, that pin there was at the top. But it's not easy to decide how these things should be aligned. So what I'm going to do now is, this outer ring is at the infinity position. I'm going to move the inner ring until it is dead flush with the outer ring. And I'm judging that with the end of a rule here. That's it. It's right there. So what I'm going to do, we've got a hole here which clearly marks the inner helical. So what I'm going to do is just run a scribe line on the outer helical at that point. Just a single line. So that tells me that I've got this in the correct orientation relative to the outer helical when the front surfaces are dead level here, and this little hole is in line with that line. So I can probably back the inner helical all the way out now, and you can see the grease on there. It's pretty nasty. Now the outer helical. This is almost like 2 pieces. It's like this chrome ring is fixed to the helical, to the outer helical. But I can't see how it's fixed. I hold the bellows, I've got the 4 screws out of the bellows so I can hold them back out of the way. Now there is a paper or felt ring around the back of that front standard. And I wonder whether there are screws underneath that felt ring or paper ring holding the inner helical in, or holding the ring in that holds the inner helical in. I just don't know. I don't know how this mechanism is constructed. Okay, another day. Let's get back to this job. Okay, well, I've had a wee think about this and had a look around, and what I want to do, there's a retaining ring on the back of this that holds us all together. So I want to flip this. So if I partly close the front, I should be able to flip that whole piece over. What's it catching on? Oh, it's catching on the bellows. If I can push them back out the way, that's better. I can flip that whole piece over by partly collapsing the front. And if you look in here, you can see there's a retaining ring here on the back of this piece, and that retaining ring is what holds this whole piece here in to the mount. It's not screwed into the mount, it's held in with a retaining ring. Now I can just tell from looking, this is all covered in the dreaded Agfa green grease. There's also reasonable likelihood that there was some, they may have locked the thread on there as well. So I'm going to use some solvent to help break that free. And what I'm using here is this stuff, CRC Heavy Duty Lectra Clean, which is something toxic and cancer causing, no doubt. Trichloroethylene, 70%. I'm going to squirt a bit on here and leave it to soak. I'll come back in 5 minutes. With a bit of luck that will have done its magic and we can have a go at getting that retaining ring off. I've already had a look through the tools to see what I had. I was hoping that this magic tool would be the one to use, but unfortunately the raised edges here and here preclude getting this thing down deep enough to get into those notches. So I'm going to be using this instead. This is less than ideal because the tips are conical, but really I would like them flat on the inside and coming up to a point, something in that variety of point, coming up like that, flat on the inside. That's not what I've got, so we'll make do with what I've got. Okay, let's see if we can get this to come loose. Might as well get it against its infinity stop so that it's got some, I've got something to push against. Yeah, it's moving. Okay, so the retaining ring is moving. It's very gummy. I'm poking it round with the tip of my tweezers now. Oh, you can see that dirty, greasy mess in there. Okay, let's get that out. Right, I'm sure you can see the colour of that. That is the famous Agfa green grease. It's evil, evil stuff. Let's flip this mount back round so you can see it. And you can see it around the mount there. So all this rubbish I'll have to clean off, and I know from experience this stuff won't dissolve nicely with naphtha. It just doesn't. You need something more with a bit more bite than that. Might be lacquer thinners, might be this magic stuff I'm using, but I've got to get all that filth off there, and it's tedious. It'll mean scraping it with toothpicks, all sorts. Some of that stuff will be very hard. It'll be very reluctant to move. Yeah, look at the colour of that stuff. I don't know much about the Agfa green grease. I don't know whether it was green from the outset or whether the green colour is something a sort of decay product, if you like, as the stuff is aged and gone from being what was presumably an effective lubricant to being a very sticky tar. But anyone who's worked on Agfas from the 50s probably through to the early 60s will have encountered this stuff, and it's extremely frustrating to deal with. Possibly the worst cases you get of it are where it's used to lubricate the front cell in a triplet, and often it just sets like concrete, and when the focus adjustment is forced, the center element of the lens simply unscrews in the lens barrel in the of the shutter, and so then you're moving your front element and the center element are being moved in tandem, which might mean that the focus remains correct at one particular setting, typically infinity if that's where the camera had been parked for a long time, but it'll be increasingly out at various other settings. Anyway, that's not our problem today. Our problem today is simply getting this green grease off the back here, and here, the thread I'm cleaning up here, this is just the thread for the retaining ring. This only needs to be clean enough so that when I put the retaining ring back, it goes back without a fight. That's not going to help us with our focus adjustment, with the smoothness of the focus adjustment. This is very sticky. This is just the retaining ring. If I was only worried about the thread in the retaining ring and it was going back into a stationary position, it wouldn't be a problem. But the retaining ring turns with this piece. And so the back of the retaining ring is rotating against the inside of that front standard. And so if it's sticky with filthy old dried grease, it will not rotate smoothly on the front standard, which is doubtless one of the problems that we've had. But this stuff, this green grease, it will set just like a lacquer. Sometimes it has to be scraped off, sometimes it will not dissolve with anything. So I'm just looking closely at the surface here to see whether the black there, that might be chemically blackened brass. It could be paint, or it could just be the lacquer from the decaying grease. Alright, it's got that reasonably clean. I want to see if it'll screw back onto that focus adjustment ring now. With a retaining ring like this, they're fairly fragile, they're easily bent, don't squeeze them between finger and thumb. If you distort them, your chance of you getting things back on there again smoothly are not particularly good. Now there you saw me put a bit of solvent on there, and that's to soften that grease is deep into the threads there. So what I'm doing is I'm working this backwards and forwards, and I'll spray a bit more of the solvent on there and hopefully work that stuff loose. These are quite fine threads. It's difficult to get that grease out of the thread completely. You can still see it coming away there. And with fine retaining rings like this, it's easy to distort them if you get too enthusiastic tightening them up. See, that should just run on very smoothly, but it doesn't. It's quite stiff. So I'll continue cleaning this piece up, and then I'll clean up the front standard on the camera body.